Welcome to BritBuzz. Russia's history is as vast as its landscapes and as complex as its culture. From the rise of Kievan Rus to the fall of the Soviet Union, this incredible journey has shaped not just the nation, but the world itself. In this video, we'll uncover the fascinating story of one of history's most influential powers, its triumphs, its struggles, and everything in between. So, let's dive into the extraordinary history of Russia. The origins, Kievan Rus and early history. 1. The Slavic tribes and the establishment of Kievan Rus. The roots of Russian history trace back to the 9th century, when the East Slavic tribes, scattered across the vast lands of Eastern Europe, began to organize into larger communities. These tribes, living in what is now modern-day Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, were connected through trade and shared cultural practices but lacked central leadership. In the mid-19th century, Norse traders and warriors known as Varangians, often referred to as Vikings, arrived in the region. According to legend, a Varangian leader named Rurik was invited by the Slavic tribes to bring order to their lands. Rurik established control over the city of Novgorod in 862. Marking the beginning of a dynasty that would shape the region's history. A few decades later, Rurik's successor, Oleg of Novgorod, expanded his influence southward and established the state of Kievan Rus, with Kiev as its capital. This city-state grew into a major trade hub, connecting the Byzantine Empire to the north through the Dnieper River. Kievan Rus became one of the most powerful and prosperous states in Eastern Europe, laying the foundation for future Russian and Ukrainian civilizations. 2. Prince Vladimir the Great and the adoption of Orthodox Christianity. One of the most transformative moments in the history of Kievan Rus occurred during the reign of Prince Vladimir the Great in the late 10th century. Vladimir inherited a fragmented kingdom, but he managed to unite the people under his rule and sought to strengthen his state through alliances and religious reforms. In 988, Vladimir adopted Orthodox Christianity as the official religion of Kievan Rus. According to historical accounts, he was influenced by the grandeur of Byzantine Christianity, particularly after witnessing the splendor of the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. His decision to convert was both spiritual and political. Aligning with the Byzantine Empire solidified Kievan Rus's position in Eastern Europe and brought cultural, artistic, and architectural influences that would shape its identity for centuries. The Christianization of Kievan Rus introduced a shared faith that unified the diverse peoples within the state. It also led to the construction of magnificent churches, such as the St. Sophia Cathedral in Kiev, and fostered the development of written language, including the Cyrillic script, which became the foundation for Russian and other Slavic languages. 3. The decline of Kievan Rus and the Mongol invasions. Despite its golden age under leaders like Vladimir the Great and Yaroslav the Wise, Kievan Rus eventually fell into decline. By the 12th century, internal divisions among the ruling princes weakened the state. The tradition of dividing land among heirs led to fragmented principalities that often fought one another, eroding the unity of the once powerful state. This political fragmentation left Kievan Rus vulnerable to external threats. In the 13th century, the Mongols, led by Batay Khan, launched a devastating invasion as part of the larger Mongol expansion under Genghis Khan's descendants. The Mongols defeated the forces of Kievan Rus at the Battle of the Kalka River in 1223, and by 1240, Kiev was destroyed. The Mongols established the Golden Horde, a powerful khanate that imposed tribute and control over the fragmented Russian principalities for over 2 centuries. This period, known as the Mongol yoke, deeply affected the region's development, isolating it from much of Europe and delaying its political and economic growth. The Mongol era and the rise of Moscow. 1. The Mongol conquest and its impact on the region. In the early 13th century, the Mongols, led by Genghis Khan's successors, began their campaign of conquest across Eurasia. By the late 1230s, they turned their sights on the fragmented principalities of Kievan Rus. In 1240, the Mongols, under Batay Khan, devastated Kiev and other major cities, marking the collapse of Kievan Rus as a dominant state. The Mongols established the Golden Horde, a khanate that ruled over the region. They demanded heavy tributes from the remaining Rus principalities and maintained control through fear and military might. This period, known as the Mongol yoke, lasted for over 200 years and had a profound impact on the region. Key impacts of Mongol rule included economic strain. The demand for tribute drained resources from the Rus principalities, stalling economic development. Isolation. The Mongol presence isolated the region from much of Western Europe, delaying cultural and technological advancements. Administrative influence. The Mongols introduced centralized administrative practices, which would later influence the political organization of emerging Russian states. While the Mongols dominated, they allowed local princes to govern their territories as long as they paid tribute. This dynamic paved the way for the rise of new power centers, particularly Moscow. 2. The rise of Moscow as a powerful state during the Mongol yoke. The small principality of Moscow, Moskva, began to grow in influence. Its rise was largely due to strategic leadership and geography. Located along vital trade routes and relatively sheltered from frequent Mongol raids, Moscow became a center of wealth and political power. One of the key figures in this ascent was Ivan I, also known as Ivan Kalida, Ivan Moneybag. As the Grand Prince of Moscow in the early 14th century, Ivan I cooperated with the Mongols and acted as their tax collector for the region. By aligning with the Mongols, he secured their favor and increased Moscow's wealth and influence. Subsequent rulers of Moscow continued to expand their territory through strategic marriages, purchases, and military campaigns. By the 15th century, Moscow had become the most powerful of the Rus principalities, positioning itself as the leader in the fight against Mongol rule. 3. Ivan III, Ivan the Great, and the end of Mongol rule. The turning point in Moscow's rise came under the leadership of Ivan III, also known as Ivan the Great, 1462–1505. Ivan III is credited with laying the foundations of a centralized Russian state and ending Mongol domination. Key accomplishments of Ivan III. Territorial expansion. Ivan III significantly expanded Moscow's territory by annexing neighboring principalities, such as Novgorod, which was a major economic and cultural center. Centralized power. Ivan III consolidated power under his authority, reducing the influence of regional princes and establishing Moscow as the core of a unified Russian state. The refusal to pay tribute. In 1480, Ivan III formally ended the Mongol yoke by refusing to pay tribute to the Golden Horde. This led to the Great Stand on the Ugar River, a standoff between Russian forces and the Mongols. The Mongols eventually retreated without a battle, marking the symbolic end of Mongol dominance in the region. Ivan III also adopted the title of Tsar and began referring to Moscow as the Third Rome, emphasizing its role as the successor to the Byzantine Empire after the fall of Constantinople. This vision of Moscow as a central power in the Orthodox Christian world strengthened its legitimacy and influence. The Tsardom of Russia. 1. Ivan IV, Ivan the Terrible, the first Tsar of Russia in 1547, Ivan IV, at just 16 years old, declared himself Tsar of all Rus, becoming the first ruler to officially adopt the title. This marked the transformation of Moscow from a grand principality into the Tsardom of Russia. Ivan IV's reign was a pivotal period in Russian history, characterized by significant reforms, territorial expansion, and brutality. Key achievements and reforms. Ivan implemented administrative changes to centralize power under the Tsar. He created the Zemsky Sober, Russia's first national assembly, and reformed the military, making it more organized and effective. Ivan also revised the legal system, publishing the Sudebnik of 1550, a code of laws that strengthened the Tsar's control over the judiciary. However, Ivan IV's reign was also notorious for his erratic and violent behavior, particularly in his later years. The harsh rule of Ivan IV. Ivan created the Upretnina, a state policy that divided the country into two parts, one ruled directly by the Tsar and was secret police, and the other governed by traditional boyars, nobles. The Upretniki, Ivan's loyal enforcers, carried out brutal purges against the nobility and anyone suspected of disloyalty. This era of terror led to widespread fear and the weakening of Russia's social and economic structures. In a fit of rage, Ivan even killed his own son, Ivan Ivanovich, in 1581, leaving the Tsardom with a weakened succession line. 2. The expansion of Russian territory. Despite his harsh rule, Ivan IV achieved significant territorial expansion. He pushed Russia's borders further east and south, transforming it into a vast empire. Key territorial gains. Ivan's most notable military victories were against the Khanates of Kazan and Astrakhan, remnants of the Mongol Empire. These victories in the 1550s secured control over the Volga River and opened access to valuable trade routes. He also initiated Russia's expansion into Siberia, a process that would continue over the next few centuries and turn Russia into the largest land empire in the world. However, his military campaigns were not always successful. Ivan's war against Livonia, 1558–1583, to gain access to the Baltic Sea was a costly failure, leading to a weakening of the Russian economy and increasing hostility from neighboring states like Sweden and Poland-Lithuania. 3. The Time of Troubles, 1598–1613. After Ivan IV's death in 1584, Russia faced a period of intense political instability, famine, and foreign invasion known as the Time of Troubles. This chaotic era lasted from 1598 to 1613 and nearly destroyed the Tsardom of Russia. Causes of the Time of Troubles. The death of Ivan IV's son and heir, Fyodor I, in 1598 left the country without a clear successor. Fyodor's death marked the end of the Rurk dynasty, which had ruled Russia since the 9th century. A power vacuum emerged, leading to disputes among the boyars, nobles, and the rise of pretenders to the throne, such as false Dmitry I, who claimed to be Ivan IV's deceased son. Key events. A devastating famine, 1601–1603, killed a third of the population, leading to widespread suffering and social unrest. Foreign powers, including Poland, Lithuania and Sweden, took advantage of Russia's weakness. Polish forces even occupied Moscow in 1610. Internal strife intensified as different factions vied for control, further destabilizing the country. The end of the Time of Troubles. The crisis ended in 1613 with the election of Michael Romanov as Tsar by the Zemsky Sober. This marked the beginning of the Romanov dynasty, which would rule Russia for the next 300 years. Michael's reign restored stability, allowing Russia to recover from this turbulent period. The Romanov dynasty and Imperial Russia won. The establishment of the Romanov dynasty, 1613. The time of the Troubles ended in 1613 when the 16-year-old Michael Romanov was chosen as Tsar by the Zemsky Sober, National Assembly. The Romanov dynasty provided much-needed stability to a fractured Russia, laying the groundwork for centuries of centralized rule. Michael Romanov and his successors focused on rebuilding the country after years of famine, invasions, and internal strife, by gradually restoring authority to the Tsar and subduing rival factions among the nobility. The Romanovs established a more unified and stable state. The early Romanovs also expanded Russia's borders, reclaiming lost territories and pushing eastward into Siberia. Their efforts secured access to valuable natural resources, increasing the wealth and influence of the Russian state. 2. Peter the Great and the modernization of Russia. One of the most transformative figures in Russian history, Peter I, known as Peter the Great, 1682–1725, took the throne determined to modernize and westernize Russia. Key modernization efforts. Peter introduced reforms to bring Russia in line with European powers. He reorganized the military, created a navy, and adopted Western technologies and practices. He modernized the government, replacing outdated systems with more centralized bureaucracies. This included reducing the influence of the boyars, nobles, and strengthening the power of the Tsar. Socially, Peter sought to Europeanize Russian society, even enforcing Western clothing styles and cultural norms among the elite. The founding of St. Petersburg, 1703. Peter's most enduring legacy was the construction of St. Petersburg, a city he founded in 1703 on the Baltic coast. After defeating Sweden in the Great Northern War, he made St. Petersburg Russia's new capital in 1712, calling it a window to the west. Built on swampland through the labor of thousands, the city symbolized Peter's vision of a modern, Outward-facing Russia. Peter's reign set the stage for Russia to emerge as a major European power, though his reforms often came at great social and human cost. 3. Catherine the Great, expansion and cultural flourishing. Another pivotal Romanov ruler, Catherine II, known as Catherine the Great, 1762–1796, is remembered for her significant contributions to Russian territorial expansion, governance, and culture. Territorial expansion. Catherine extended Russia's borders dramatically, particularly to the south and west. Her campaigns against the Ottoman Empire secured access to the Black Sea, and her participation in the partitions of Poland, 1772, 1793, 1795, brought vast new territories under Russian control. By the end of her reign, Russia had become the largest country in the world, stretching from Eastern Europe to the Pacific Ocean. Cultural and intellectual flourishing. Catherine was an enlightened monarch who embraced ideas from the European Enlightenment. She corresponded with prominent philosophers like Voltaire and Diderot. Under her rule, Russia became a cultural hub, with the development of art, literature, and education. She established schools, supported the arts, and expanded the Hermitage collection, now one of the world's greatest art museums. Despite her enlightened reputation, Catherine's reign also saw the tightening of serfdom and the suppression of peasant uprisings, such as the Pugachev Rebellion. 4. Russia's role in European politics and the Napoleonic Wars. By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, Russia had firmly established itself as a major player in European politics. The Napoleonic Wars. During the early 19th century, Russia played a crucial role in this fight against Napoleon Bonaparte. Initially allied with Napoleon, Tsar Alexander I, 1801–1825, broke ties with France due to conflicts over trade and territorial ambitions. Napoleon's disastrous invasion of Russia in 1812 marked the turning point in the Napoleonic Wars. The Russians employed a scorched earth strategy, forcing Napoleon's Grand Army to retreat in defeat during the harsh winter. After Napoleon's downfall, Russia emerged as a dominant power in Europe, participating in the Congress of Vienna, 1815, to redraw the continent's political boundaries. European influence. During this era, Russia was deeply involved in alliances and wars that shaped Europe, solidifying its role as a major empire. At home, the Romanovs worked to balance modernization with maintaining traditional autocracy, a challenge that would continue into the 20th century. The 19th century, Reform and Revolution. 1. The abolition of serfdom under Alexander II, 1861. One of the most significant events in 19th century Russia was the abolition of serfdom by Tsar Alexander II in 1861. For centuries, serfdom had been the backbone of Russia's agrarian economy, with peasants bound to the land and their landlords, living under oppressive conditions. By the mid-19th century, serfdom was widely seen as outdated and a major obstacle to modernization. Reasons for abolition. Russia's defeat in the Crimean War, 1853–1856, highlighted the country's need for reform and modernization, including freeing its workforce to develop a more efficient economy. Moral and social pressures from intellectuals and reformers also pushed for change, emphasizing the inhumanity of serfdom. The Emancipation Edict of 1861. The reform freed over 23 million serfs, granting them personal freedom and the right to own property. However, the process was far from perfect. Peasants were required to make long-term payments to the state to purchase the land they worked, often at inflated prices. Many peasants received poor quality land, leading to widespread poverty and dissatisfaction. While the abolition of serfdom was a groundbreaking step, it created new challenges, including tensions between the peasantry, the nobility, and the government. These tensions would later fuel revolutionary movements. 2. Industrialization and political unrest. By the late 19th century, Russia began to industrialize, although it lagged behind Western Europe. Tsars such as Alexander III, R. 1881–1894, and Nicholas II, R. 1894–1917, introduced policies to modernize the economy and develop industries. particularly in cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg. Industrialization efforts, railroads like the Trans-Siberian Railway, completed in 1916, were constructed to connect Russia's vast territories and improve trade. Factories and urban centers grew, attracting millions of peasants to cities in search of work. However, rapid industrialization came with significant social challenges. Poor working conditions, low wages, and lack of political representation led to growing dissatisfaction among workers. Urban overcrowding and harsh living conditions created fertile ground for political unrest. The rise of socialist and revolutionary movements. During this period, revolutionary ideas began to take hold, inspired by the growing inequality and failures of the government to address social issues. Key movements included populists, narodniks, advocated for peasant-led socialism and the redistribution of land. Marxists, following the ideas of Karl Marx, they aimed to overthrow the autocracy and establish a workers' state. In 1898, the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party, RSDLP, was formed, later splitting into two factions, the Mensheviks and Bolsheviks, led by figures like Vladimir Lenin. These groups would play critical roles in Russia's future revolutions. 3. The Russo-Japanese War, 1904–1905. The Russo-Japanese War was a disastrous conflict for Russia, fought over control of territories in East Asia, particularly Korea and Manchuria. Causes of the war: Russia sought to expand its influence in Asia, clashing with Japan's ambitions in the region. Diplomatic failures led to a breakdown in negotiations, and Japan launched a surprise attack on the Russian naval base at Port Arthur in 1904. Key events and outcome: Japan won decisive victories on both land and sea, demonstrating its growing power as a modernized nation. The war ended with the Treaty of Portsmouth, 1905, brokered by the United States, which granted Japan control over key territories and forced Russia to retreat. Impact on Russian society: the defeat was a humiliating blow to Russia, exposing the weaknesses of its military and government. It eroded public confidence in Tsar Nicholas II and sparked widespread unrest. The war drained the economy and increased dissatisfaction among workers, peasants, and intellectuals. It directly contributed to the 1905 revolution, a wave of strikes, protests, and demands for political reform. The 1905 revolution and the establishment of a constitutional monarchy. The 1905 revolution was a pivotal moment in Russian history, marking the first significant challenge to Tsarist autocracy and leading to major political changes, including the creation of a constitutional monarchy. 1. Causes of the 1905 revolution. The revolution was driven by widespread dissatisfaction with the government, exacerbated by a combination of long-standing and immediate factors. Economic hardships: rapid industrialization had created poor working conditions, low wages, and overcrowding in cities, leading to widespread strikes and protests. Peasant unrest: peasants faced poverty, heavy taxation, and land shortages following the abolition of serfdom in 1861, fueling resentment against the landowning nobility and the Tsar. Political oppression: the lack of political freedoms in the Tsar's autocratic rule alienated many, including workers, peasants, and the growing intelligentsia. Military defeat in the Russo-Japanese War: Russia's humiliating defeat in 1905 exposed the incompetence of the government and sparked widespread anger. 2. Key events of the 1905 revolution. A. Bloody Sunday, January 22, 1905. The revolution began with a peaceful workers' march in St. Petersburg, led by Father Georgy Gapin, to present a petition to Tsar Nicholas II. The workers sought better wages, improved working conditions, and political reforms. As the march approached the Winter Palace, government troops opened fire on the unarmed crowd, killing and wounding hundreds. This massacre, later known as Bloody Sunday, shattered the people's faith in the Tsar and ignited nationwide protests. B. Strikes and uprisings. Following Bloody Sunday, strikes and uprisings erupted across the empire. Workers formed soviets, councils, to organize protests, while peasants attacked estates and demanded land redistribution. Ethnic minorities also staged uprisings against Russian rule. See mutinies in the armed forces. Discontent spread to the military, with notable events like the mutiny aboard the battleship Potemkin, where sailors rebelled against their officers. 3. The October Manifesto and the establishment of a constitutional monarchy. In response to the growing unrest, Tsar Nicholas II reluctantly agreed to concessions. On October 17, 1905, he issued the October Manifesto, a document that promised significant political reforms. Creation of the Duma, a national parliament, was established to give citizens a voice in governance. Civil liberties. The manifesto guaranteed basic freedoms, including freedom of speech, assembly, and association. Legal reforms. The manifesto introduced measures to address the demands of workers and peasants. These changes marked the transformation of Russia into a constitutional monarchy, where the Tsar's powers were theoretically limited by the Duma. 4. Limitations and continued discontent. While the October Manifesto seemed like a victory for reformers, its implementation fell short. The Tsar retained significant control over the government, often dismissing or overriding the Duma's decisions. Many revolutionary groups, including the Bolsheviks and Mensheviks, rejected the reforms as inadequate and continued to push for more radical change. The unrest of 1905 exposed deep fractures in Russian society that the reforms failed to address, paving the way for future revolutionary movements. The Russian Revolution and the Soviet era. 1. The fall of the Romanov dynasty. During the February Revolution of 1917. By 1917, discontent with Tsar Nicholas II's rule reached a breaking point. Russia's involvement in World War I caused severe economic hardship, food shortages, and military defeats, leading to widespread strikes and protests. In February 1917, workers in Petrograd, modern-day St. Petersburg, staged massive demonstrations demanding bread and an end to the war. The protests escalated into a full-scale revolution as soldiers mutinied and joined the crowds. Tsar Nicholas II was forced to abdicate on March 2, 1917, ending the 300-year-old Romanov dynasty. The revolution resulted in the formation of a provisional government, led by moderate liberals and socialists, but it struggled to address Russia's ongoing crises. 2. The October Revolution of 1917 and the rise of the Bolsheviks. The provisional government failed to meet the demands of the people, particularly regarding peace, land reforms, and workers' rights. This discontent allowed the Bolsheviks, a radical socialist faction led by Vladimir Lenin, to gain support. In October 1917, the Bolsheviks staged a coup d'etat the copyright tat, seizing control of Petrograd and overthrowing the provisional government. This event, known as the October Revolution, marked the beginning of Bolshevik rule. Lenin's government immediately implemented reforms, including withdrawing Russia from World War I through the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, 1918, and redistributing land to peasants. However, these changes sparked the Civil War, 1917 and 1922, between the Bolsheviks, Reds, and their opponents, Whites. The Bolsheviks ultimately triumphed, consolidating their power. 3. The creation of the Soviet Union, 1922, and Stalin's transformation. In 1922, Lenin and the Bolsheviks formally established the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR, a one-party state based on communist principles. Lenin's death in 1924 led to a power struggle, with Joseph Stalin emerging as the Soviet leader by the late 1920s. Stalin's policies and transformation of the USSR, industrialization. Stalin launched ambitious 5-year plans to rapidly industrialize the Soviet economy, making it a major global power. Collectivization. Farmlands were collectivized, leading to widespread famine, most notably the Holodomor in Ukraine, 1932–1933. Political repression. Stalin's regime was marked by purges, forced labor camps, gulags, and mass executions, with millions of people killed or imprisoned. Under Stalin, the USSR became a superpower but at a tremendous human cost. 4. World War II, The Soviet Union's role and sacrifices. The Soviet Union played a pivotal role in defeating Nazi Germany during World War II, 1939–1945, initially signing a non-aggression pact with Germany. The USSR was invaded by Hitler in 1941, Operation Barbarossa. Key contributions: the Red Army's victory in the Battle of Stalingrad, 1942–1943, marked a turning point in the war. The USSR's advance from the east, culminating in the capture of Berlin in May 1945, was instrumental in ending the war in Europe. The war came at an immense cost for the USSR, with over 20 million Soviet citizens killed and widespread destruction of infrastructure. The victory solidified the USSR's status as a global superpower. 5. The Cold War era, space race, arms race, and rivalry with the U.S. After World War II, the Soviet Union and the United States emerged as rival superpowers, leading to the Cold War, 1947–1991, a period of political, military, and ideological competition. Key aspects of the Cold War: space race. The USSR achieved early victories, including launching the first satellite, Sputnik, 1957, and the first human, Yuri Gagarin, 1961, into space. Nuclear arms race. Both nations developed massive nuclear arsenals, leading to a constant threat of global annihilation. Proxy wars. The Cold War fueled conflicts in Korea, Vietnam, and Afghanistan, with the USSR supporting communist forces against U.S.-backed opposition. Domestically, the Soviet Union maintained strict control over its citizens, suppressing dissent while promoting its achievements in science, education, and industry. The reforms of Mikhail Gorbachev, Glasnost and Perestroika. Glasnost, meaning openness, and Perestroika, meaning restructuring, were pivotal reforms introduced by Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev in the mid-1980s. Glasnost aimed to promote transparency in government and increase freedom of speech, allowing citizens to criticize the government and discuss social issues openly. This policy led to a greater flow of information, media freedom, and political debate, which exposed the flaws of the Soviet system. Perestroika focused on economic and political restructuring. It sought to revitalize the stagnating Soviet economy by introducing market reforms, decentralizing control, and reducing the state's role in managing businesses. However, these reforms led to economic turmoil, shortages, and growing dissatisfaction with the central authority. Together, these policies weakened the Communist Party's control over the Soviet Union and spurred demands for greater autonomy from various republics within the Union. The fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of communist regimes in Eastern Europe. The Berlin Wall, a symbol of the Cold War division between the Communist East and the capitalist West, fell on November 9, 1989. This event marked the beginning of the end for communist rule in Eastern Europe. The wall's collapse was precipitated by widespread protests across Eastern Europe, where people were demanding more political freedom and reforms. In East Germany, the government faced increasing pressure, and a botched announcement about travel restrictions led to a mass exodus, forcing the wall's dismantling. The fall of the wall led to the reunification of Germany in 1990 and the eventual collapse of communist regimes throughout Eastern Europe. Countries like Hungary, Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Romania overthrew their communist governments, and democratic reforms were adopted in the region. These events were a significant blow to Soviet power and influence in Eastern Europe, highlighting the inefficiency and unpopularity of communist regimes. The official dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991,